Hey folks, how you doing? Dave McRae here. Sorry I haven't been around the last 5 or 6 days or so. I know I've been MIA, missing in action. Yeah, I've been a little under the weather. And nothing major, but a lot of congestion and sneezing and kind of shit. And because I use my voice to make my living, I sort of had to nurture that and, attend to it as quickly as possible. So I'm not 100% yet, but I'm probably about 75 or 80%, good enough that I wanted to do this video because I've been wanting to talk about this for quite some time. So I thought, why not? I'm still feeling kind of shitty, but why not, right? I feel good enough to do it. So let's do it. So in this video, I want to talk about the differences between a reboot and a remake. But I want to take you to either end of the spectrum because it is a bit of a spectrum, but I want to take you to either end of that spectrum to give you sort of a clear understanding of basically, by and large, what these two terms mean. Because there is a lot of overlap, but there are distinct differences. So let's start here. Okay. About 30 years ago, the word remake was generally the only word that was used to describe a remake. If you were going to remake something or redo a movie that was older, you would use the word remake. But somewhere along the ways, of course, they started doing so many remakes, and a lot of remakes weren't really good, and the word remake, the term remake, started to develop this bad connotation to it. So they had to introduce, they introduced this other word that pretty much meant remake, but it sounded more hip and modern, right? Especially with the computer age. So whether that was on purpose or not, I don't know, but they came up with the word, they didn't come up with the word, but they started to sort of introduce the word reboot into the entertainment pop culture consciousness in regards to movies. And that was probably about maybe 15, 20 years ago, maybe a bit longer, give or take. At the beginning, it essentially meant the same thing, but it has grown organically over the years to actually have its own identity. And a large reason for that could be because of the superhero genre, because they're constantly reinventing itself and redoing things and changing things and, redoing this and doing that. So definitely reboot is used a lot when it comes to, the superhero genre. So we have, that genre to thank for it, definitely propelled it into the pop culture consciousness. But this is what you have to think of, okay? So here is the difference between a reboot and a remake. And again, I'm going to take you to either end of the spectrum so that when you on your own read an article or, they're talking about a reboot or, a remake, you basically know the clear sort of understanding of either end of that spectrum, and you can identify what that is, hopefully, pretty quickly. But keep in mind, there is a lot of overlap and they do start to kind of mesh together, the further along down that spectrum you go. So it's not like, they can, intertwine at certain times, if you know what I mean. But I'm going to keep you here, okay, as best I can. So a remake, by and large, is when you take the source material, whatever that source material is, however long ago that source material was, you take it. So there it is. We have the source material in our hands now, right? And we look at it and we go, okay, we're going to take this and we're going to make this today. Okay. And if we want it to take place today in 2018 or whatever the date is, and depending on how long ago the source material was, you may have to change and update certain things, right? Okay, so we have to update the clothing, we got to update the cars, we got to update the houses, maybe well, that name's not really, Herbert's not really popular today, so we'll change Herbert to, Kevin, whatever the case is, right? So, certain things may update, but the general cinematic style, execution, the narrative, the character names, the protagonists, the antagonists, what the story is, what their roles are, their jobs, by and large, they don't change. Because you're taking this and you're remaking it for today. Because you think, because maybe 40 years ago, it was a little, ahead of its time. And we can take this now because, the shit that's going on now in the world or, in the entertainment industry or socially is really relevant now. So let's take it and remake it for today's audiences. That happens all the time, right? And because they feel that, and that doesn't mean that the director or the filmmakers don't put their own stamp on it. Absolutely 100%. 100%, but you can clearly tell that you were watching a remake of that original film. A lot of the beats are the same. You'll see a lot of classic moments from that old film. So if there was a moment in that old movie where a guy gets hit by a car and he rolls off the car and falls into a manhole or something, and it was a classic scene in that film, you'll get it in the remake, but maybe it's done a bit better, right? Or maybe it's not done a bit better depending on what you're, emotionally attached to, right? But certainly you'll get all those beats, right? You'll get all those beats, all those parallels, because they're telling that story for today. And again, that doesn't mean that there won't be a new character here or there, but the overall story, it is the same story. It's the same story. It's the same movie. Now, when we go to the other end of the spectrum and we look at reboot, okay, generally speaking, a reboot is more or less focused on series, rebooting a series as opposed to one movie, okay? Not all the time, but generally speaking, the term reboot is used when we're talking about starting a series up again. And here's where it gets a little complicated. Usually, the first movie in a series can be a remake, because they want to get everybody back on board. So they want to tip their hat and pay homage to the original. So they essentially play it safe and they remake the original film. And no, The Force Awakens was not a remake of A New Hope. It wasn't. The character names were not the same. The antagonist was not the same. The protagonists were not the same. The narrative was not the same. Just because there were some parallels does not mean it was a remake of A New Hope. It wasn't a reboot of A New Hope either. But that aside. So they tend to play it safe in hopes that this movie is going to reboot the series, right? And then they tend to play it less safe as they start to remake the rest of the series, right? Because now they have you on board. So the perfect example of this would be like A Nightmare on Elm Street from 2010, the remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. That, for me, that's a remake, okay? Because the character names are the same. It's about Freddy Krueger. It's about Elm Street. He's got the red and green sweater. He's got the glove. He's burned. He's got the hat. Nancy is our main, protagonist. We got some really good, beats in that film. Freddy coming through the wall. I think he did. Anyway, I think that's in there. It's definitely a remake. But it was hoping that it would reboot the series. All reboot means is to start again. Okay, like think of it as your computer, right? Ah, shit, my computer froze. Okay, well, I got to reboot it. I got to turn it off and turn it back on, right? So usually reboot is thrown around when we're talking about a series. But this is what you have to think about. If they're going to, but you can reboot one movie. Absolutely. And the perfect example of that would be the Planet of the Apes movies, the modern Planet of the Apes films. So when you look at reboot, you take the source material, right? Okay, so there we go. We have our source material, and there's a lot of creative liberties that you take with that. So you don't have to keep the character names. You strip it down to its core. Like you strip it down to its core and you rebuild from the ground up. So you can change a lot of the character names. You can change a lot of the narrative and the sequence of events to fit, a more modern time or a certain cinematic style. You might keep some things the same because if you change everything, then it's a shell of, what it was. So obviously it's not like in Planet of the Apes, they're all ducks, right? Obviously they're apes, right? So, you keep that general sort of thing there, but they focus on a different part of the timeline, right? So they focus on something that, we actually see how it came to be, as opposed to the original Planet of the Apes movie. Charlton Heston just fell onto Earth and things were already like that. And you didn't know that, of course, till the end of the movie when he sees, the Statue of Liberty in the sands, like, oh my God, holy fuck, he was on Earth the whole time. It was great, right? Awesome moment. One of the greatest endings in cinematic history. But now, of course, with the reboot of Planet of the Apes, we're seeing a different side of the story. Like we're kind of seeing how it comes to be. So it's definitely a reboot. Like it's different. New characters, new antagonists, new protagonists, new, situations and people, but under the banner of Planet of the Apes. They keep that there. It's about apes. It's about this, but we're going to strip it away to its core and rebuild from the ground up. And they even did that with the first movie, right? So that's a reboot because you're rebooting everything. Like you're rebooting a system, right? You're rebooting a system. So in its purest form, that's what you can think of when you think of a reboot, okay? And when you think of a remake, remakes tend to focus on one movie only. I mean, you can remake a series, and remake the first one, pretty much what the other one was, and remake the sequel pretty much what the other one was. But that generally doesn't happen. Usually they remake the first just to get you on board, and then they kind of start to not play it as safe with the other films, and usually it's not always as successful. So to recap, a remake is taking the original source material, whatever that source material is, taking it, looking at it, and telling that again today. That doesn't mean, again, that some minor things won't change, but you're taking that story and you're telling that story again today with the same characters, the same plot points. Again, doesn't mean they don't make it their own or add some things, but it is the same story with the same characters, the same sequence of events. They're telling that story again today. A reboot is taking that source material, looking at it, stripping it away, right down to the roots, and rebuilding from the ground up, right? So it's taking the character, maybe you're taking the character, but you're rebooting the continuity, okay? You're rebooting the narrative. So instead of going this way, which you've gone for years, maybe with another series or another film or another set of films, you're pulling it back and you're going this way. So now we have a new direction, new characters, new flavor, right? That's essentially what you're doing. This is why I haven't liked the word reboot when talking about it in this manner, because all reboot, like I said, essentially means is to start again, right? You know, if your computer freezes, you turn it off, you start again, right? So a better word that has sort of crept into the pop culture consciousness now for quite a few years, because reboot is beginning to have this bad connotation to it as well, is the word reimagining. Okay. And actually that is a better word to use when you're talking about rebooting a series, because that's what you're doing. When you're stripping it away, and rebuilding it up, you are essentially reimagining this movie for a modern time, or, you're doing things better, or you're taking this and expanding on it and making it bigger, right? So you're rebooting it, but it's more of a reimagining, a new vision, right? Of something old that came before it. Now, there's also such things as, a soft reboot or a hard reboot. And a soft reboot, might be something like, okay, we're not totally reconstructing the continuity. We're just taking and totally pretending that the other movies never happened. We're just sort of pulling it back a bit and kind of going over here. So instead of going like this, we're kind of pulling it back and going over here, right? But then there's a hard reboot, right? And a good example of a hard reboot would be, like I said, the Planet of the Apes films or the Batman movies. Those are good examples, right? Clearly, Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, is a hard reboot. It has nothing to do with Tim Burton's Batman movies or Joel Schumacher's Batman movies, right? It is a hard reboot. It's pulling it all the way back, stripping it down, and going right over here, right? So, but like I said, the further you go along on that line, there can be a lot of overlap, right? So that's why, I think it's best to kind of remain at either end of the spectrum, so that when you're reading articles or you're listening to, interviews, you can look at it and remember those, two ends of the spectrum and go, okay, is this a reboot? Yes, I think it's, yes, it more falls into the reboot category. Or is this a remake? Yeah, it falls more in the remake category, right? So I just want to give you that sort of general layman's kind of simple perspective on it. The only thing that I hope doesn't continue, of course, is now, reboot is beginning to have that bad connotation to it, right? And just look at the interview with Jason Blum just a couple of days ago, and I quote, he said this, he says, "The way to get people interested is to not reboot. The term makes my hair stand up on the back of my neck. What we're doing with Halloween is, I guess I'll use the term reinvention. Reboot just sounds so corporate. The way we attacked Halloween was to go after what we've done with a lot of other movies. David Gordon Green and Danny McBride are not known for horror. Jordan Peele was not known for horror before Get Out. So I think we've had a lot of success mixing genres of people, not the movie. The movie's a straight, scary movie. So I think we've got a very original voice with David Gordon Green and Danny, and having Jamie Lee Curtis and John Carpenter back in the mix, to me, was the beginning. And it's like, okay, Jason Blum is not, like a lot of people, were carrying the story saying, oh, he's denying that it's not a reboot. Well, not really. He's just saying that the word reboot now is starting to have that bad connotation like remake did, 20 years ago. So now it's like, no, it's a reinvention. Yes, it's a reinvention. I'm like, oh, fuck. 5 years from now, it's like, oh, reinvention, it gets me goosebumps. It gets the hair on the back of my neck. It sounds so corporate, that reinvention shit. How about re-envision? Re-envision, yes, and then we'll just be on this perpetual state of all these R buzzwords that we introduce, into the pop culture consciousness. And now it's like, well, is it a reboot? Well, it's a reboot, but it's a remake with a reimagining of a reinvention with a re-envision. That's what it is. And it's like, Anyways, back to my original point of my video, remake, reboot, or however I posted it, remake, reboot, whatever side of the spectrum of my hands that I put them on, keep them there. That should help you to decipher what people are talking about, because that's the general idea of what they are. Okay. Anyways, folks, my name's Dave McRae. Comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you want to follow me on Facebook, you can at facebook.com/manythingsdavemcrae. McRae is MCRAE. Facebook.com/manythingsdavemcrae. That's where I tend to post in the meantime and in between time when I'm not posting here. As well, if you want to help support the channel each and every month via Patreon, you can. The link is in the description. We're up to 61 or 62 patrons. If we can get to 100, all your names will be entered into that draw to win that 12.5-inch Lamson Michael Myers replica knife, the same one I used in my little fan film from February called The Shape Attacks. That's on the channel. You can check it out. So that would be greatly appreciated if you want to do that. If not, that's okay too. It doesn't matter. I will, in the meantime and in between time, I will talk to you guys soon. Cheers.